Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Health Tech with Purpose. Today's guest is Romy Carlson, co-founder of NetGame Consulting and head of growth and partnership at Hello Alpha. Welcome, Romy. How are you today?
I'm doing great today. I'm four meetings in and a number of cups of coffee. So far, so good.
That's a typical day of a growth marketer, I would say.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Yes, great. So I know the fantastic work that you've been doing with a lot of great companies and helping them grow. And I know that it's such a tough job. So why not we start right, digging deeper into more of your work and,
Yeah.
how you've been accomplishing some of the things that you have accomplished. So what works for you?
Yeah, sounds great. Uh, just an overview, I think sometimes is helpful after 23 years in corporate health and wellness and the last 15 in digital health with some of the most innovative and interesting companies in this space. I have definitely learned a lot. I would say, my day to day is never the same. So that's the one thing about digital health sales. Especially, I work with early stage to kind of Series A, Series B startups. And so some of the most mission driven founders who are trying to get really amazing products out into the world to help people. And one of the areas that is most challenging, I think, often is the go to market side of the business. A lot of times, founders, we find are product people. So they're brilliant technologists, or they're, and maybe most often, they're servicers, right? They're clinicians who see the problem and know how to solve it, but they aren't very often salespeople. So I think that's actually the biggest challenge for the majority of digital health organizations. And I think that goes from seed stage all the way up to the most mature companies, that their founders and a lot of their executive teams don't come from a go-to-market background. And so even building those key foundational pieces of a sales strategy and a marketing strategy are foreign to them, and not something that they're confident in.
Right. And I can connect, like working myself with so many health
Yeah.
founders. One of the things they always get, stuck into is, after building the product, what next, how to find the users, how to
Yeah.
get the users, even after, they've built a great product, a great hypothesis, at least we can say for a startup, how to test it because they just don't know how
Yeah.
to get those first few users who could provide that feedback, the first feedback on whether it works or not, and so on. So tell us more, like, let's take it another deeper level. Like, let's say you're working with a founder, early stage. So what has been your go-to recipe, or let's say from our listeners, if they were to take some takeaways
Mhm.
today, if you were to consult with them, what would your go-to way like to help them, or how they should be navigating these waters?
Yeah, it's interesting. I just actually spoke in a panel on Global Entrepreneurship Week here in Kansas City about a week ago with two other local leading sales execs for large organizations, and we actually were asked the same question. And I think we each had some different points of view, but at the end of the day, when we boiled it all down, there were a couple things that really stood out. And the first one is selling is a team sport. And especially when you're at an early stage, everyone in the organization is essentially in sales. Even if they think sales is a four-letter word, they've got to lean in and get involved and leverage their resources, leverage their networks, get creative, and get out of their comfort zone. And so, as a founder, a lot of times the first steps that they look to take, not unwise, but maybe not the most efficient, is they'll look to hire a singular sales exec, an account executive, or a VP, and essentially say, go sell. It's like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. If you go talk about it, they will buy. And that's just not the way it works. And so I think some of the most important early stage pieces are to understand that selling takes process and procedure to create a sustainable model. And so you have to be opportunistic, but as soon as you get that first pilot, that first person that is interested in talking to you, a proof of a market fit, usually from a friend or from a business contact or from a luncheon that you went to and you just happened to talk to somebody, then you need to really study that what we call an ideal client profile. You need to really get down to the fundamental components of what makes that buyer buy your product. And if nothing else, when you start a sales initiative, you need to know that. You need to know who is likely to buy your product and why. And I think a lot of times, because founders go in knowing that they're solving a problem, they think that's just how we sell. We're going to solve a problem. Everybody's going to want to buy it. But in fact, there's lots of problems to be solved. We know in healthcare, right? There's no lack of problems to be solved. And a lot of times it's about prioritizing and getting your prospect to prioritize your solution over all the other solutions that they've got to assess and maybe consider to invest in. And so I think that really important part, that first step, is doing the work, doing the research, getting out there, hitting the pavement around, as a founder, around who is your ideal client profile and why are they going to buy your product. Once you do that, you can build. But until you have that, it's very difficult. And I think it's essentially like, throwing something at a wall to see if it sticks. It's really not scalable. It's not, replicatable. And especially if you're going to go and ask for investment, having, that kind of hope approach really makes investors uncomfortable. And so I think really starting to build from that foundation of knowing that ICP and knowing why they buy your product is the most important.
Right. And they say, in fact, that reminds me of something interesting I was reading, that, finding the first customer is more difficult than finding the first 10, and then finding the first 10 is more difficult than finding the first 10. So it rather works in a inverse way. So it's difficult at the, at the start rather than getting more customers. Easy getting your customer is actually difficult.
I think that's spot on, right? I think you do so much work to get that first customer. It's a lot of guerrilla work, right? You're trying to figure out how to affordably market and get your information out there. You're an unknown brand most of the time. And so you are leaning on your friends, your network, your relationships, your, maybe your own thought leadership. And that takes a lot of time and energy and a lot of, I think humility along the way, because you're asking for a lot and you're trying to, you don't have a lot to go off of. You're hoping for them to have some faith. And that first customer is going to be faith-based no matter what, because you don't have a case study, you don't have any record, you don't have any proof points. And so being able to go in and find that first one and really do a good job with it, and then be able to use them to engage you in the next ones. Referral sales is always the best for startups, because those first clients are going to be the ones that are the most excited. And usually they're early adopters. They're invested in your mission. And so they want to be part of your success. And so I'd also think, especially maybe I read a book early on when I was looking at not-for-profit work called Uncharitable. And one of the statements stood out for both for-profit and not-for-profit, which is we're too polite in the US. We don't engage, we're too formal and we're too concerned about the perspective, that the kind of the way we look to someone else. When you're starting something and you have to shout it from the rooftops and you have to tell everybody you meet about it. And you can't have any of that concern for shame, because at the end of the day, when you go to bed at night, you have to know that you gave it every chance to flourish. And the way you do that is to get it out there and talk about it. And you never know. The one thing I've also learned, I recently worked with a client, and I was just happened to be sitting at a luncheon, just randomly placed next to the HR executive for a large company here in Kansas City. And we were just chatting. And one of the things I mentioned was that I represented a company that has maternity care app. And that HR executive said, you know what, we've prioritized, we found out that a large portion of our employees are either going to have a baby or they're entering into birthing years. And so we're actually looking for some solutions there. And we were able to make that connection. And it was such a random statement and something that I was really excited about, but also just happened to be the right place, right time. And I think it'll be a really powerful first relationship for my client and something that'll be really meaningful into the future. So you just never know where that first client is going to come from. That's, all the podcasts about how founders get started, right? Remember that story because you're going to be asked to tell it again and again. Who is that first client and how did you find them?
Right. True. So, quick question on another thing that you touched upon, Romy, and I would like you to elaborate more, is the alignment. Like you said, it's a team sport. It's not the sales guy to sell. It's about, all the founders. And we also discussed how difficult it is since most founders sometimes may not, realize that. So what has been your way to bring in that alignment? What are the challenges you've faced and how you've solved it?
Yeah, most of the time I actually tell early stage through Series A startups, they really shouldn't hire a full-time account executive. And it's not because there aren't great ones out there. It's not because they don't do a great job. It's because the act of building a sales initiative and a marketing initiative takes so many skill sets and so much bandwidth. And one person with one specialty doesn't have the capacity to do that. And I've seen it so many times where, they'll find an Eagle salesperson and they'll pay them $100,000, so much of their capital and runway they'll put into that person. And it's a setup for failure on both ends because without having some sort of lead generation system in place, without having some sort of CRM in place, without having a strategic marketing plan in place, you're really giving no resources to that account executive. And at the end of the day, I find
you just got the fuel without having other parts of the car.
Yeah, you really did. And
because you
no gas.
That fuel probably allows aeroplane to move fast. So you just got that fuel without having anything else in place. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And of course, you have to build the airplane while you're flying it and founding a startup. But one of the things that has started to evolve, because there are so many digital health entrepreneurs, are resources like what my consulting firm offers. And it's a shameless plug, but it really is why we founded the consulting firm, is because I've been the one hired so many times, that first sales exec. And even if I get one or two sales because of the relationships that I have, it's not scalable. And I was getting frustrated. All these founders had such fantastic products, but we couldn't scale it because just me alone is not something that you can build on. And, I'm honest enough to say that one of the things I'm the worst at is cold calling. Lead generation for me is painful. I'm really good at going to my network and using my relationships, but it didn't even matter before. When I was in my 20s and I didn't even have relationships, I still was awful at lead generation. That is a very specialized skill set. And so having that resource early on so that you can get that top of the funnel filled, so that that account executive or your founder, who's often is your best storyteller about the product, that they get the at-bats that they need, right? That they get sales is a numbers game. And so at the end of the day, if you get that person who's mission driven and built the product and understands the story and what it does and why they did it, a bunch of conversations around it, you're increasing your likelihood for success by a huge amount. And so having someone who can do that top of funnel work, building, and it really sits alongside of cold calling, also that top of funnel marketing, right? So having that social media presence, being able, I think LinkedIn is one of the best, almost free resources in B2B right now. and it's so underutilized. And so, but a lot of times founders are like, oh, I feel uncomfortable. I don't want to make everybody think that I'm, so cocky about, you should be. You did a whole bunch of work to get this thing off the ground and you believe in it, and it's going to change people's lives. And so be cocky, be out there on LinkedIn. And there's a lot of really good strategies to do there. And there's a lot of fantastic marketers who've learned the hard way how to do that. That's the other piece that I tell founders a lot of times is there's no reason for them to reinvent the wheel. There are new ideas that come out all the time. We're creative, and AI is creating a ton of opportunities. But at the end, also, it's important to know that there's a bunch of us who have experience and who know how to say, don't waste your time on that. Don't put money into that because we're not there yet. Or it tends to not work with this type of product. I've done it before. I learned that. Take that learning from me. And there's marketers in the same vein. And so I always tell founders, finding those experienced resources and even bringing them in as advisors or as consultants or as fractional resources is the best use of your own internal, capital as well as time. Because founders, not only are they not the best salespeople all the time, and by the way, they are the best storytellers. So I stand by that. They can tell the story of the product the best, but they don't know those building blocks to how to build a sale. And so ultimately, bring in those people that are invested, passionate about your product, but also have that expertise and get those pieces built. And then the other piece I would say, have a CRM. One of the topics that my co-founder talks about a lot is opportunity leaks. So just like you mentioned health, you mentioned Vive while we were just kind of warming up here. You go to conferences, you talk to 100 people while you're there. It's so busy. You'd get all their cards, but then what do you do with them? How do you manage that? And a lot of times founders and early stage salespeople don't have a really good system for that. Salesforce is too expensive. And so there are lots of really affordable CRMs that allow you to start to manage that in an organized fashion so that you don't, lose any of those opportunities that you already put out time and money to get. And I think that that's one of those tips that I would say. I hate managing it. It's not my favorite. I love to talk, obviously. So I don't want to dive into a CRM, but if you have one thing that a founder can do to really optimize their chances for getting those early sales, it's to build out that initial tracking of their opportunities.
Invest it in it and use it, because I also seen that they've bought the best CRM, but then the team does not have a habit to use it.
Yes.
Rigor
around your process. Again, salespeople, most of them are like me. They like to talk and they like to relationship build. We love to go to lunches and talk to everybody in the room. I love conferences. I get to meet more people. But one thing that I have to really focus on is my discipline and rigor around tracking all of that. And I'm the daughter of two entrepreneurs, and they talked a lot about the cost of acquisition, the cost of running a business. And so it stuck with me that it is my responsibility to my organization, whether it be the one I'm founding or the ones that I'm supporting, to make sure that I track all of that information and have it available. Because if I lose it, that's money that they wasted. And that's just not right. We need to be really efficient about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true that. And so one other thing, Romy, that I really wanted you to elaborate on is a go-to market plan that, since you've been a strategist for so long, working with some of the great companies. So I would want you to elaborate more about template for a go-to-market and like how companies can do it in the most successful manner. What are the red flags that they need to see for, or what are those initial wins that they can do, like any of your growth hack or something, any secret spill. So yeah, all of that.
I'm going to really let your listeners down, because there really, unfortunately, isn't a hack for this one. I mean, I think there's lots of resources. There's free resources, right? Score is a really good one, as well as, Google, right? I started my first company that I founded. It was in 2000, and there was so much less available at our fingertips in 2000. And now, for most founders, you can go on and type in sales plan, and you'll get, unfortunately, probably thousands of templates and a bunch of them free. I don't worry so much about the template itself, but about, again, discipline of doing the work. So making sure that early on, once you've identified that, especially once you've identified that ideal client profile and you've have that first pilot, that first sale, that you actually set aside time and attention to putting the strategy work into building a plan. Because I do think what a lot of people do is they get that first client and then they do something really smart. They go find a whole bunch of other companies that look just like that client, which is exactly what you should do. And they go sell to them. They go try and sell to them. But the step they miss is creating the strategy doc, that plan that's going to say, this is why we did this next step, and this is who we're targeting, and this is how we're going to target them. So a plan is only as good as its components and the time that you spend on it and the data that you put in it. And so really taking that first ICP, that first one, and assessing it, diving in deep to it. And maybe it's your first one or two, because maybe you have a couple channels that you can go after. Maybe, in digital health, a lot of times your channels are payer, their provider, health system, their employer, or their retail RX. Those are, there's some version of all of that. And so you need to identify, maybe you get to sell your product into all of those. I certainly have clients that do, but then some work has to be done in which one is your lowest hanging fruit, your most opportunistic, and then build the plan around that. Be laser focused. You cannot be bright, shiny object at that point. Certainly have your ear open for opportunities, because there are nice people in your network that are going to bring you something and that might be game changing. So you never want to say no. But with your day-to-day work, laser focus on the channel you're going to sell into, the ideal client profile that you want to sell to, and then build the plan from there. The other challenge that I find for entrepreneurs and founders, and actually all the way up to 60,000 person companies that I've worked for, is revisit the plan. The plan is a living, breathing document. It is not something that you build and then you put it on a shelf and you never go back to it. It's something that evolves and it grows with you. And I think the most successful startups that I've seen have been able to create that first version and then iterate on it as they've grown and as they've seen success and as they've seen failure, right? So they, instead of, kind of just going with momentum, they intentionally build upon that initial plan and they're strategic about it. And I think for a lot of us, again, that takes some discipline to bring yourself back and say, okay, here's what we're seeing with our activities. Maybe it's a regular monthly revisit to the plan, maybe then again quarterly, and bring your advisors in, right? Bring those early stage investors or, subject matter experts that you relied on to build the product, bring them in and give them visibility and have them give feedback. Entrepreneurs and founders and salespeople who are open to that feedback are the most successful in the long term. And sometimes it's hard to hear it. Sometimes it's even scary. I know founders who the feedback has been, honestly, this isn't the right product. Here's what we think is going to sell. Here's what we're hearing in the market. When we pitch this, or maybe this isn't the right pricing, or maybe this isn't the right packaging. But the only way to actually address that and know it is to have that revisit, that discipline around having that conversation on a regular basis. And the scariest thing I've ever seen as a consultant to startups are startups that a year after we've built that plan, they've never revisited it. And then I go back in and I have a conversation with them and I say, where are you at? And they say, we're really struggling. We got those first couple sales, but then after that, we just couldn't seem to get it. And if I say, we go back.
Yeah. No, true. With you, you can continue the thought. I was just saying that making it repeatable is a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's that going back. I do think it's that holding yourself accountable to that. And then taking what you learn from the market. Your clients and customers and prospects are your best advisors. They're going to tell you. They're going to tell you if the product's priced right. They're going to tell you if the product's packaged right. They're going to tell you if they saw your marketing and if that was the right approach to it. And they're going to tell you if your messaging is hitting where it needs to hit. So have your ears open, be able to take that information in, and then be willing to pivot. There has never been a founder that I've worked with, and now I think I'm up to like 25 different companies that I've worked with over the years in some capacity. There's not one of them that said that first product that we launched is exactly what we ended up bringing to market successfully. Every single one of them that actually made it and grew their company, whether it was to acquisition or going public or, any number, legacy growth even, they all said, if we go back and we look at what we started with, the iteration that we are at now is almost unrecognizable, or maybe it looks a lot the same. We just had to tweak these couple things, but they all made changes. They all were open to that along the way, and they all did have that willingness to invite others in who are experts. This is, I go back to, I'm an athlete at heart. So I go back to, this is a team sport. You need to be willing to see that as a founder, whether or not you are good at sales, you have things that you need to ask for. You need to have other resources. You need to pull them in. And as a sales exec, even if I'm supposed to be the expert, sometimes I just need another sales exec in the room to say, hey, you missed this. They said this, and this is how I heard it. And I think if you took that in and you built that into the business case, you'd get the deal. And so it's not that I don't know how to sell. It's just that I hear things differently than other people. And so being open to those different resources, and then again, revisiting and always taking in that data and activating it, is going to make a difference between having one or two clients and having a fully scalable, business that shows growth into the long term.
Right. No, well said. And just like you started by telling, which is important, that there's no secret. It's more of a repeatable, doable, and disciplined process that requires a lot of other parts moving in sync, and like achieving results. Results happen when resonance happens, basically. So
Yes.
But very, very useful. I think it's more like what comes to my mind is that just like there are big books written about how to be healthy, but eventually it's about, everybody knows basically, like, that eat right, drink less, do exercise, but then follow it. I think, the sales success is pretty much like that. So it's pretty much like, it's a big secret if you want to make it, but to be honest, it's those foundational aspects, which, still people would know it, but then, only if you follow it and you associate yourself to it, you would always find yourself, falling short.
I think that's a hopeful part of it. I guess I would even kind of, conclude, the hopeful part is that there's an ability to have system, right? A lot of people, sales and marketing are this kind of mysterious thing in their minds, and they seem, almost magical. And at the end of the day, they aren't. It is something that has process, that is a numbers game, that as for someone who, likes to be successful, anytime you can give me a process and a step that I can take to do something, and then I can replicate it, that gives me a lot of hope. I will also say, though, and I think this is the piece that, ultimately you're looking for, in that, what is the magic bullet? I don't think there's any one single magic bullet, but if I would think about a behavior that increases your chances for a magic or a huge opportunity, or one of those lucky breaks that we might talk about, it is that rigor around doing all the other pieces, that those at bats, it's not, I've never seen someone just happen upon, right? Because like they didn't do any sales work, they didn't build anything around a strategy, and then they just ran into the right person and they bought a huge deal. anyone who watches Shark Tank, anyone who studies any business, podcast or reads any books, is going to see that there was a bunch of work, a bunch of conversations, a bunch of things that happened that did lead to that. I have seen a lot of founders who ended up with a really, it's what seemed like lucky break, the perfect ICP, the perfect, an early adopter sitting right next to them, or an early adopter that their mom knows and that they got introduced to, or, something that seemed so lucky. But when I actually break it down and look, there were a whole bunch of steps that they did that put them in the position to get that opportunity. And I think, there's a really good podcast that I listen to around building businesses. And they always ask, was it luck or was it hard work? And every founder has a different take on it. But the standard answer that I see, the theme, is that luck's created by that system and that hard work. And then you get the break.
Yeah, you get lucky once you do the hard work. Yeah. And then there's witchcraft. So,
yeah. And if anyone knows the way to do that, tell me. I'll apply it. I have no shame. I'll put whatever works into place.
Right. No, great. So much, so good. So much really good knowledge that you have shared, Romy. And thank you so much for the openness and the attitude that you brought to this discussion, sharing all your heart. So thank you so much. And we really appreciate you joining in and doing this podcast with us. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me. I love the work that you're doing. I think it's, again, I started my first in 2000. It would have been great to have a podcast like this that would have given me this insight. So really appreciate all the work that you've done on this. And I certainly enjoyed this. So thank you.